This is exam reviews for semester, spring semester, problem number 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is pretend like that says equals 0 instead of less than 0. So I'll go ahead and rewrite that for you, even though it's not necessary. So x squared plus x minus 20, and I'm going to pretend like it says equals 0. Now, the way we would solve that is we would factor it. So it factors into x plus 5 times x minus 4 equals 0. Then we set the two factors equal to 0, so x plus 5 equals 0, or x minus 4 equals 0. And then we subtract 5, and we get x equals a negative 5. And we add 4, and we get x equals 4. Now, what is that? Well, that's the two numbers that go on our number line. When you put them on your number line, the negative 5 is the smallest, so it goes first. And then the 4 is next. All right, now we decide whether we need parentheses or brackets. So in the original equation, what we're looking at is this. If it's a less than symbol, then it gets parentheses, but since this is less than or equal to, it gets brackets. Now what we want to do is test these intervals. We want to see which test interval makes it true or false. So we're going to take a number to the left of negative 5 on the number line. The number to the left of negative 5 on the number line that I'm going to use is a negative 6. We're going to plug it in. So I call this the check. So for our check, we're going to put in a negative 6. So a negative 6 squared plus a negative 6, which means minus 6, minus 20 has to be less than or equal to 0. So that gives me 36 minus 6 minus 20 is less than or equal to 0. It gives me 30 minus 20 is less than or equal to 0. So 10 is less than or equal to 0, and that's a false statement. Since it is a false statement, I do not shade to the left. All right, now let's pick a number in between a negative 5 and a 4. And a good number to choose there is 0, and let's plug that in. I'll use a different colored pen so to stand out a little bit. So I've got 0 squared plus 0 minus 20 is less than or equal to 0. It gives me a negative 20 is less than or equal to 0, and that's a true statement. Since that's a true statement, that means I'm going to be shading in between those two numbers. All right, and then I want to check one more, and that is the third interval, which is greater than 4, so I'm going to choose a 5. So I get 5 squared plus 5 minus 20 is less than or equal to 0. And that's 25 plus 5 minus 20 is less than or equal to 0. It gives me 30 minus 20, so again I get 10 is less than or equal to 0, which is false. So the only place I'm shading is between the negative 5 and the 4. Now, this that we already determined gets brackets, so we're going to put bracket on the negative 5 and a bracket on the positive 4, and then we're shading in between, and there's the graphical solution. Now it's going to want the graphical solution, but it's also going to want it in interval notation. Interval notation looks very similar to the graphical solution. It's a bracket, negative 5, comma, 4, and a bracket. And there's interval notation and the graph. Let's go to the second problem. All right, we're going to start with the same process, and we're going to let the quadratic equal to 0. So we get x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. Then we're going to factor it. It factors into x minus 7 times x plus 2 equals 0. And then we set each part equal to 0, so we get x minus 7 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0. Add 7 to both sides, we get x equals 7. Subtract 2 from both sides, we get x equals a negative 2. All right, now we're going to go down to our number line. On our number line, our smallest number is a negative 2, and our larger number is a 7. That's only two numbers you really need on the number line. Now let's do our check again. So we're going to check a number to the left of -2. So I'm going to use a -3. It doesn't matter what number you use, but I'm going to use a -3 for it. So I'm going to go to the original inequality. I'm going to put in a -3 squared minus 5 times a -3 minus 14, and that's supposed to be greater than 0. So -3 times -3 is +9. -5 times -3 is +15. Minus 14 is greater than 0. It gives me 24 minus 14 is greater than 0. So 10 is greater than 0. That's true. So because that's true, we're going to be shading over there. So that's true. We'll shade in a few minutes. All right, let's try something in the middle interval. So I'm going to use 0 for that. And 0 is really easy to check. I'm not even going to write it this time. I've got 0 minus 14. So I get a -14 is greater than 0, which is false. So I'm not going to shade there. And then last but not least, I'm going to put in something to the right of 7. Something to the right of 7 would be 8. So I've got 8 squared minus 5 times 8 minus 14 is greater than 0. That gives me 64 minus 40 minus 14 is greater than 0. That gives me 24 minus 14, which is 20, and 20 is greater than 0. So I'm going to, that's true. So I'm going to shade over there. So now go again and look at the problem. In the problem, the symbol was just a greater than, not a greater than or equal to. That means I'm using parentheses. And since I have to shade to the left of -2, I put a parenthesis on -2. And since I'm shading to the right of 7, I put a parenthesis on 7. And then I shade to the left of -2, which would look like this, and to the right of 7, which looks like this. All right, so there's the graphical solution. And after I do the graphical, then I do the interval notation. How far left does this function go? It goes to -infinity. And how far right does it go? It goes to 2. And then it's a union symbol. And it picks back up at 7. And it goes to infinity. And there's interval notation.